Hello and welcome. My name is Whitney and I'm an anesthesia intern documenting my journey as I go through my first year of residency. I just finished up my third and final week of my cardiology elective, so I'll be talking just a little bit about that. It was honestly pretty similar to my first 2 weeks of my cardiology rotation, which I talk about in another video, so I won't be going too much into detail about that. And instead, I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about step three and what my preparation leading up to step three looked like, and now how life is that it is hopefully over for me. We'll see. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so I'll start off by talking about just briefly about my cardiology week. If you watched my video from last week talking about my first 2 weeks of cardiology, you'll know that I actually really like this rotation, and I continue to like it during this week as well. And it's for a couple of reasons. I really like cardiology. I think the physiology of the heart and even the pathology is just very interesting. And I also really like the application of the medical knowledge to the patient itself. I don't know, I just think it's really interesting and I just really like it for that reason. Another reason I really like this rotation is I think just the workflow in general, for a couple of different reasons. So first of all, we're not working with as many patients, so that by itself is really helpful on being able to really just focus in on each individual patient and feeling like you can actually learn something about them. That also paired with the fact that we are in a specialty, meaning that we really just get to focus in on what their cardiac problems are. So we're not looking at the patient as a whole in terms of like every problem that they have. We're really just focusing in on the ones that affect the heart. So those two things together, I think, just make it really easy to feel like I can learn a little bit more about patients, and also that it's not quite as overwhelming. And then the last reason I really like this rotation, and this one feels kind of like a softer reason for liking something, but we round later in the morning. And if you don't know what rounding is, I do talk about it in a previous video, but just a quick run over of what that is. It's when we as a team, meaning the residents, interns, and the attending, come together to talk about the patients. And there's usually a lot of preparing that goes into rounding. So as an intern, and even as a resident on this rotation, you are expected to like look up your patient, go talk to them, and just gather as much information as you can, and then create a presentation to give during rounding. So that just takes time. And, just having it be a little bit later, you don't feel quite as crunched on time, which I actually really appreciate. So yeah, just overall, I really, really like this rotation, and I am sad that it's over. One other thing I can talk about on this rotation that for me was kind of a highlight, I really liked it, was the imaging associated with the heart. So pretty much every patient we saw, we would eventually get something called an echocardiogram on, which is just echocardiography, just means like an ultrasound imaging of the heart itself. So for pretty much every patient we saw, we would go over these echo, is what we would call it, images with our attending. And usually we were just looking at the images because there are actually echo techs or technicians who go and take the imaging for the cardiologist. So these are people who are highly trained and skilled, I would say, on getting imaging of the heart with ultrasounds. I've tried doing this before, and it's actually really hard to get the probe in the right spot and not let, like bone shadows and like all these other technical things get in the way of that. So it's really impressive to see like how people do it, just because it's really hard in my opinion. And I don't know, it's just that was interesting to see. Anyway, so it's kind of a tangent. So yeah, we were just looking at the images. We weren't actually doing the images itself, if that makes sense, because that's what the technicians were doing. Now, for what the technicians were doing, they were doing something called a TT, as in Tango E, which is a transthoracic echocardiogram. So transthoracic meaning through the chest. So the probe for the ultrasound would actually be on the chest itself. So you would be looking at the heart from the front side or like the anterior side. And that was really helpful, but there's actually another type of echo called a TE, as an echo E, or a transesophageal echocardiogram. And that is actually where the probe goes down the esophagus. And the esophagus is just behind the heart, so you could actually see the heart from the back side or the posterior side. And that was super interesting to see, just because it was something different. I had never seen it before, but also because anesthesia was involved during that process as well. As you can imagine, as you're putting a probe down someone's throat into their esophagus to get it correctly aligned to look at the heart, that's pretty intense on a patient. So you don't actually want them fully alert and awake for it. They're not fully sedated, but they do have a little bit of medication on board just to make them more comfortable during the procedure itself. So that was really neat to see because I'm going into anesthesia. So whenever I see anesthesia involved in anything, I get just like a little bit more excited. So that was nice. But also just seeing the different modality and imaging. I don't know. I just, again, really liked cardiology. So it was cool in many aspects to see that. That's really all I have to say about my cardiology rotation. I really liked it overall, and I'm sad it's over. Just really glad that I took it because I didn't expect to like it this much, but I ended up really liking it, which is great. So I'll be moving on to nights next, which that will be new. So we'll see how that goes. I'll talk about that in my video next week, but for the rest of this video, I will be talking about step 3 and really just looking at how my schedule has changed from before taking step 3 to now being done with it, hopefully, and just seeing how I spend my time. To start talking about step 3, I will say that I studied quite a bit for it. A lot of people, from what I've heard and seen online, say that they don't end up studying all that much, but I didn't want to go into that exam feeling like I hadn't studied at all, so I tried to take it pretty seriously, and I'm glad I did. It was a pretty hard exam. It was 2 days long, which I mentioned before, and both days I kind of walked out not feeling great, but there's nothing I can do about it now. So we're just going to wait to see what the score comes back as. But yeah, overall, I would say that I did study quite a bit. It's hard for me to say exactly how long I studied for because I did study kind of more leisurely for probably like 3 to 4 months before I actually took my exam. Like once I knew when I was taking it, I was doing maybe like 5 to 10 questions a day. I hadn't really started doing like Anki cards or anything like that right away, but I would say for like the couple of months before the exam, I was kind of just like leisurely studying. And then when it got to like 4 to 6 weeks before I actually took the exam, that's when I was much more disciplined. I, like set goals for myself of doing sometimes like 80 to 100 questions a day, which can take a really long time. And I was doing Anki cards and just like really focusing on that. And I made a schedule for myself. And I feel like I do really well when I do that, just like having, like set what I want to get done. So for me, I really needed that. And that really came in handy, like I said, for like the month and a half before I actually took the exam. And unfortunately, during that time, whenever I had free time, I was studying. It was really kind of sad. Like I would wake up earlier than necessary, sometimes like a couple of hours earlier to study. And then I would come home and I would study. And then I would like eat dinner, relax for a little bit, and then go to bed. And that was my life for like 4 to 6 weeks. It was pretty intense, especially because I was on, like my surgery rotation um, before this cardiology one. So I was studying while working those crazy hours. So it was pretty intense for a while there. But now I can say that it's over with. It feels so great because I don't have to study anymore. Hopefully, if I don't pass, I'll probably have to do it again. But again, I don't want to think about that until I actually see my score. So I'm just gonna be blissfully unaware. And yeah, I just feel so much more relaxed, and free time is just, it's so much more now, especially on this rotation. So it's been really nice. I'm much more relaxed and less stressed, and I kind of knew that that was going to happen. Like I chose to do this exam kind of earlier in the year just because I knew no matter when I did it, I would be stressed. So I'd rather just do it kind of towards the beginning, get it out of the way, and then just try to enjoy the rest of the year. And like when I had downtime, actually be able to relax instead of studying. I felt like if I had scheduled it further into the year, it would always kind of be hanging over my head. So I'm glad I did it when I did. And now we wait for the score. The last thing I'll mention about step three and studying is that, having taken step three, that means I've taken step one and two. And going through that process, I feel like I've really figured out how I study best. So I knew for me that doing the spaced repetition with the Anki cards and doing the question banks through UWorld were how I was going to study best. I feel like it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, even though I feel like that is pretty common for people to do, especially the question banks. I feel like that's like you have to do those pretty much. But yeah, I feel like I used to not know how to study for these exams, but having taken three now, I feel like I've really gotten down like what works best for me. So I didn't have to figure that out during my intern year, which thank goodness, because that would have been just like one other thing that I would have to do, but I didn't have to, thankfully. All right, well, that is really all that I want to mention about step three. So let's go ahead and wrap up this video by looking at how many hours I actually worked this week. So I'll go ahead and pull them up over here. Yes, this is a Monday through Friday rotation, so I did have Sunday and Saturday off, which is very nice. And then other than that, the days honestly weren't too long. Each day was, I would say, like a half day pretty much. Maybe 6 hours is a little bit longer than a half day, but still not too bad overall. I will say that this is also, these hours are including our academic time. So usually we were done by like noon and then we would just go to lecture after. So that's why it's a little bit longer. The actual amount of time that we were on this rotation was a little bit less than the total hours that you see here. But overall, it was a total of 25 hours, which is really not bad. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming along as I went over my final week of cardiology. Very sad that it's over. I will be going on to nights next, which I briefly mentioned earlier. So we'll see how that goes. I will report back next week. Take care, everyone.